Hello everyone, welcome back. So moving on to the next heading under the Union Executive, it's about the Council of Ministers, the Central Council of Ministers or the Union Council of Ministers. Uh, you know that we have in Article 74 saying that the Council of Ministers will aid and advise the President. So that's the most important provision relating the Council of Ministers. Now, according to Article 74, it says there shall be a Council of Ministers with the Prime Minister at the head to aid and advise the President. So this means that the President functions or uses his powers with the help of the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister. Now, the second provision regarding a Council of Ministers is that the advice given by this Council of Ministers to the President shall not be inquired into by any court. So, whatever be the advice given by the Council of Ministers to the President, no court can conduct an inquiry into it. So, this is this shows the secrecy of the nature or the advice, the secrecy of the advice given by the ministers or the Council of Ministers to the President. And next is about Article 75. So basically Article 75 and 74 deals with the Council of Ministers, the major provisions regarding the Council of Ministers. Now Article 75, it says that the Prime Minister will be appointed by the President. This we had seen yesterday. We saw that the Prime Minister will be appointed by the President, and other ministers are appointed by the President on the advice of the Prime Minister. So after the Prime Minister is appointed, the Prime Minister will advise or recommend which are the people who are to be appointed as ministers. So President will appoint the ministers, but on the advice of the Prime Minister. The next provision is that the total number of ministers, including the Prime Minister, in the Council of Ministers shall not exceed 15% of the total strength of Lok Sabha. This means that whatever is the strength of the Lok Sabha, only up to 15% of it should be the strength of the Council of Ministers. So if you have 100 members in the Lok Sabha, 15 should form the Council of Ministers. So this is kind of a ceiling on the number of ministers you can include in your government. Then again it says the ministers shall hold office during the pleasure of the President. Ministers hold office during the pleasure of the President. President is the appointing authority. So during his pleasure, the minister shall hold office. But even here you must understand that even though technically they hold office during the pleasure of the President, it's a they hold office as long as the Prime Minister pleases. The Prime Minister can always advise the President to remove a certain minister, or he may even ask a minister to resign. And also another thing, a member of either House of the Parliament or a member of either house belonging to any political party who is disqualified on the ground of defection shall also be disqualified to be appointed as a minister. Defection here is, suppose you are, elected on the, on a particular party ticket. For example, you contested the election as a BJP or a Congress or a Communist Party candidate, and you won the election. But then later, once you become the minister, once you take oath as a member of the Parliament, if you decide to leave your party and join a different party, then that act is called defection. Koorumattam nu parayum. So if anybody in the Parliament has been punished on the ground of or disqualified on the ground of defection, then that person shall be disqualified to be a minister as well. Next is that the Union Council of Ministers shall be collectively responsible to the Lok Sabha. Towards the end of this video, I'll be telling you or explaining what is collective responsibility. Next is the President shall administer the oath of office and secrecy to a minister. So President administers the oath. And any minister who is not a member of the parliament for more than 6 consecutive months shall cease to be a minister. See, when we talked about the prime minister, we saw that anybody can be a prime minister. I meant that any person, even if he's not a member of the parliament, can still be a prime minister for 6 months. So within that 6 months, before that 6 month term expires, he has to acquire membership in any of the houses. The same way, a minister can also be a member, be a minister, even if he is not a member of either house of the parliament for consecutive 6 months, provided within that 6 months time he acquires the membership of either of the house. So if he fails to get membership to any of these two houses, he ceases to be a minister. And then finally, the salaries and allowances are determined by the parliament. So they themselves can decide what their salaries are. So next major provision about the Council of Ministers is given in Article 88. Article 88, which says or talks about the rights of ministers with respect to the as respects of the houses. It says that every minister will have the right to speak and take part in the proceedings of either house. So every minister will have the right to speak and take part in the proceedings of either house. So not necessarily the house in which he is a part of, but he can be speaking and taking part in the proceedings of either house. But he can vote only in that house where he is a member. That's the only difference. Now, regarding the nature of the advice given by the ministers, I had already mentioned in the beginning of this video that it has a secrecy. The advice given by the ministers are secret, which means that no court can inquire into the nature of advice given by the Council of Ministers or ministers to the President. So it's a very confidential relationship that you have between the Council of Ministers and the President. And very, very important thing, 42nd and 44th Constitutional Amendment Acts have made the advice binding on the President. Whatever advice is given by the Council of Ministers, it's binding on the President. And very importantly, there's the court in 1974 has upheld that wherever the Constitution requires the satisfaction of the President, the satisfaction is not the personal satisfaction of the President, but it is a satisfaction of the Council of Ministers with whose aid and advice the President exercises his powers and functions. So here once again it proves that whatever powers and functions the President has, they are not so real in nature, because he exercises it with the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. So that's why I said when you read, the powers of the President are only nominal. President is only nominal in nature. Rather, the real powers are with the Prime Minister and then with the Council of Ministers. So wherever you see that President can use his satisfaction or so, it doesn't mean the satisfaction of the personal satisfaction of the President. Rather, it means the satisfaction or the approval of the Union Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister. Now, coming to the appointment of ministers, see, Prime Minister is appointed by the President, and then on the Prime Minister's advice, various ministers are appointed by the President. So appointing authority is the President, but the Prime Minister will decide who will get which ministry. Usually members of the Parliament are appointed as ministers. So in most cases you have either a Lok Sabha MP or a Rajya Sabha MP becoming a minister. But even if a person is not a member of either the Lok Sabha or the Rajya Sabha, still he can be appointed a minister, but within 6 months he has to acquire membership in either the Lok Sabha or the Rajya Sabha. And also, as I just told you, a minister has the right to speak and take part in the proceedings of either of the house, but he can vote only in that house in which he is a member. And moving on to the next important concept, which is the responsibility of the ministers. Here basically you have the collective responsibility and individual responsibility. So these are the two concepts that we will be dealing with here. Number one, collective responsibility. So this is a core principle that underlies the working of the parliamentary system of government, which is the collective responsibility. So Article 75 makes it very clear that the Council of Ministers are collectively responsible to the Lok Sabha. They are collectively responsible to whom? To the Lok Sabha. So remember this term, they are collectively responsible to none other than the Lok Sabha. So which means this means that they are in power only as long as they enjoy the confidence of the lower house or the Lok Sabha. So it's a joint responsibility. They have a joint responsibility to the Lok Sabha for whatever they do and for whatever they fail to do. Whatever, for all their acts of omission and commission, they are jointly responsible to the Lok Sabha. So if the Lok Sabha passes a no confidence motion against the Council of Ministers, then all the ministers, the entire Council of Ministers will have to resign, including those ministers who hail from the Rajya Sabha. So if Lok Sabha passes a no confidence motion against the Council of Ministers, then the entire council will have to resign, including those members of the council who are from the Rajya Sabha. Now, the principle of collective responsibility also has one more meaning, which is that the cabinet decisions are binding on all the cabinet ministers or all the ministers, even if they have differed in the cabinet meeting. I had already told you what is the difference between a council and a cabinet. Council is a larger body of ministers, whereas cabinet is a smaller body. So within this whole big body of council of ministers, you have a few important ministers, a smaller body of ministers who form the cabinet. Usually they are senior ministers who hold major portfolios like defense, foreign affairs, finance, etc. So within the larger body called the Union Council of Ministers, you have a smaller body called the cabinet. So cabinet is a very, very decisive body in the working of the government. They are very influential in the decision making process of the government, and they have a higher stature, higher rank within the Union Executive. So all the major decisions of the government are taken after discussing it in the cabinet. So you have the cabinet meeting happening, and the meetings will be presided by the Prime Minister, and in the cabinet meeting they arrive at certain decisions, and such decisions of the cabinet, they are binding on all the ministers, be it the cabinet minister or the other minister, they are binding on the entire Union Council of Ministers. So even if they had deferred it, or they had deferred to the cabinet decisions in the meetings, once the decision is final, they are supposed to defend it. So if you are part of the Union Council of Ministers, you are supposed to defend or supposed to agree to the cabinet decision. So it's a duty of every minister to stand by the cabinet decision and support them both within and outside the parliament. So here comes the next aspect of collective responsibility, which is that if any minister disagrees with a cabinet decision and he doesn't want to defend the cabinet decision, then he has to resign. So if a member or a minister doesn't want, or if he's not prepared to defend the cabinet decision, then he has to resign. So this means that all cabinet decisions should be collectively defended by the Union Council of Ministers, and if the minister doesn't want to defend it, then he has the option of resigning. That's the only option before him. We have had the examples of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar resigning because of the differences on Hindu Code Bill, and C.D. Deshmukh resigning, then Arif Muhammad resigning. So these are all various examples in history. Next is about individual responsibility. Article 75 also talks about individual responsibility. It basically means that ministers hold office during the pleasure of the president, which basically means that the president can remove a single minister even at a time when the council of ministers enjoys the confidence of the Lok Sabha. So even while the council is in power, a single minister can be removed. That's the that's the meaning of individual responsibility. And even the prime minister also can advise the president to remove a certain minister. Next is about the composition of the Council of Ministers. Again, this is an important topic. See, we have three categories of ministers, namely cabinet ministers, minister of state, and deputy ministers. So you might have noticed in TV or newspapers, whenever a minister, whenever you address a minister, you find that the minister either falls into either of the three categories, either the cabinet minister, minister of state, or the deputy minister. So the three categories differ in the rank and their political importance. Now, cabinet ministers, the very first category, the very first in rank and the most important category, they are, cabinet ministers usually are in charge of important ministries like home, defense, finance, external affairs, etc. So the most important ministries are headed by the cabinet ministers, and they have a separate body called the cabinet. So cabinet, you have cabinet meetings happening where important decisions are taken and important things are discussed, and they are a very, very influential body. Cabinet is a very influential body, and they have a very, very important role in the decision making process. So whatever the government does, the cabinet will be aware of it. The second category is the ministers of state. Ministers of state. So they can be either given an independent charge of a ministry or a department, or can be attached to a cabinet minister. So minister of state can be either an independent ministry or they can be attached to a cabinet minister. So either ways it can be. So if they are attached to a cabinet minister, they may be given the charge of a department of the ministry headed by the cabinet minister. So under the cabinet minister, you will have different departments. So a minister of state can be given the charge of a separate department under the cabinet minister. So this is in the case of attachment to the cabinet minister. And sometimes they can be given or made in charge of a ministry independently also. So in either case, they work under the supervision and guidance and an overall charge of the cabinet minister. And notice that the minister of state, they are not members of the cabinet, and they never attend, and they do not attend the cabinet meetings unless they are specially invited. Sometimes they may be specially invited because the cabinet is discussing something related to that particular department or that particular ministry. In that case, they may be specially invited, but otherwise, the ministers of state do not attend the cabinet meetings. The next in rank is deputy ministers. Basically, deputy ministers will not be given an independent charge of any ministry or department. Most often, they are attached to the cabinet ministers or the ministers of state. So, they work under either the minister of state or under a cabinet minister, and they basically assist them in their administrative, political, and other parliamentary duties. So, this is about the Union Council of Ministers. Then here you have a column that talks about the distinction between the Council of Ministers and the Cabinet. So as you can see, it's a Council of Ministers is a larger body, whereas Cabinet is a smaller body. Then Council of Ministers includes all the three categories of ministers: Cabinet ministers, ministers of state, deputy ministers. But when it comes to cabinet, you only have the cabinet members becoming part of it. So it's a smaller body. And Council of Ministers does not meet as a body to transact government business, but cabinet always meets as a body. They meet very frequently, like once a week, to deliberate and take decisions on various affairs of the government. Then Council of Ministers is vested with all the powers, but in theory. See, notice in theory. And cabinet is really, really powerful, and in the exercise of the powers of the Council of Ministers, it's actually the cabinet that exercises its power. So, real powers are with the Union Cabinet. Next is its functions. The Council of Ministers, the functions are determined by the Cabinet, whereas in the case of the Cabinet, it directs the Council of Ministers by taking policy decisions which are binding on all the ministers. So whatever decisions the Cabinet takes, it's binding on all the ministers. The Council of Ministers' duty is to implement all the decisions taken by the Cabinet, and Cabinet basically supervises the implementation of its decisions by the Council. Now, these are the major differences between the Council and the Cabinet. And one more thing, notably, the Council of Ministers is collectively responsible to the lower house or the Lok Sabha, whereas in the case of Cabinet, it enforces collective responsibility of the Council of Ministers to the Lok Sabha. So, the Cabinet can even, through the Prime Minister, advise a single minister, an individual minister, to resign from the Council of Ministers. So, this is all about the Union Council of Ministers. So, thank you everyone. See you. Stay safe.